Tim Sheehy turned the interview into his moment. Check it out.
Is cutting programs and laying off federal workers. So do you support the White House taking that, unprecedented step here?
Well, of course. I mean, what choice do they have if they don't have the money to run the government?
During an appearance on CNN, Kaitlan kept repeating the same question no matter what the senator said, until he had enough and flipped the script with a single line.
But that you're acknowledging that what the Trump administration just pulled in funding is hurting your state.
Of course it is. As I said, we want the government to be open. You should be saying this to Chuck Schumer, who's closing the government down.
That's why today we're covering it all, because we're not here to follow parties blindly. We're here for common sense. So, if you're an independent thinker, hit the subscribe button and let's jump right into it.
When it comes to the White House strategy, as the president today was saying there are going to be more cuts to come to programs and layoffs, is that something that you support?
Well, listen, Kayla, I mean, this is unfortunate. Nobody wants the government not to function, especially folks like me who are new to government. We come here, we want to get things done. We want to improve the nation. We want to fix problems that our constituents sent us here to fix. Now, right now, what we're seeing, though, I think is a little bit different than past shutdowns, albeit this is the first one I've personally been here for, is that this is a clean CR that, as Speaker Johnson said, was already supported by the Democrats earlier this year. This has already been passed. And the appropriations process of this Congress, the 119th Congress, on both sides have said we need to get back to regular order on our appropriations process. We stopped using the appropriations process, which really was built into our system 250 years ago. And that's led to these shutdowns time and again because we govern and budget by CR now, continuing resolution. And the appropriations process is meant to head this off. This very issue we're seeing right now that you and I are talking about is meant to be dealt with in committee through the 12 appropriations bills that move their way out of committee, that to move their way to a budget bill on the floor that allows these grievances to be aired in committees, the committees of jurisdiction. So healthcare can be dealt with the healthcare committee, and they can have these negotiations and come up with a policy and a budget that meets the demands of all parties.
This is the core issue no one wants to touch. Back in the early 20th century, Congress passed 12 separate appropriations bills each year. That process, called regular order, worked because the government was smaller and lawmakers could finish negotiations before the fiscal year began. But the 1974 Budget Act changed everything. It introduced a more complicated system, and soon after, deadlines started slipping. By the late 70s, Congress began relying on short-term funding bills known as continuing resolutions. The gridlock of the 80s and 90s only made it worse, and lawmakers started building multiple bills into massive omnibus packages just to avoid shutdowns. According to the Pew Research Center, since 1997, quote, Congress has never passed more than 5 of its 12 regular appropriation bills on time. And since the Budget Act, they've managed to pass all 12 only 4 times. Clearly, something is wrong with the system. But instead of focusing on the fascinating knowledge the senator brought to the table, Kaitlan asked the same question with slightly different wording.
One thing that's different from this shutdown than we've seen in any shutdown, the last 14 of them we counted since 1981, is cutting programs and laying off federal workers. So do you support the White House taking that, unprecedented step here?
Well, of course. I mean, what choice do they have if they don't have the money to run the government? What are they supposed to do?
You don't have to cut programs or lay off federal workers. It's literally never happened before in government shutdowns in the last 14 of them.
Well, I don't think that's accurate. I mean, Bill Clinton laid off I think he laid off 600,000 plus government employees during his tenure, and a lot of that was during a shutdown.
Not during a government shutdown as a result of the government shutdown, though.
Well, I mean, whether you attribute it to the government shutdown specifically or the fact that people aren't getting paid and their force is leaving as a result, I mean, you can play the chicken and egg game and label it any which way you want, but I think reduction in government force has happened during previous shutdowns, whether as part of a strategy for negotiation or whether it was a byproduct of the shutdown itself. I think either way, one way or the other, it doesn't really matter. The point is the government should be open. There's no reason for it to be closed right now.
Exactly. This debate shouldn't even be happening. But if we're being fair, there's truth to what they both said. You see, during Clinton's first term, there were actually 2 shutdowns back-to-back. The first lasted 6 days in November of 1995. Then, just a month later, it happened again, from December 16th to January 6th, right through the holiday season. Hundreds of thousands of federal workers missed paychecks, and according to the Washington Post, the private sector felt the ripple effects too. At the time, the government was pushing a buyout program aimed at cutting down the size of the federal workforce. After the shutdown, the morale was so low that there was growing talk about how public employees needed to rethink their roles and future with the government. But if you're a CNN reporter, context like that gets ignored. Instead, every effort goes towards twisting the moment to make the Republican guest look bad, no matter what history actually shows.
They're also cutting programs, though. One of them is one you've thrown your support behind. It's the Treasury Department's Community Development Financial Institutions Fund. You signed a letter with a bunch of other lawmakers supporting that earlier this year, and you were on the record with that. The president says they're only cutting Democrat programs and Democrat stuff, but is that a Democrat fund that you supported?
Well, like I said at the very beginning, none of us want this to be happening. There have to be consequences for bad behavior. This is bad behavior on the part of Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. But let's just call it what it is. They are holding the government hostage because they want to bring back programs that the American public has expressed their will through the ballot box. This is the direction we want our government to go in. Now they're saying we're not going to allow you to let the government function, so unless you give us $1.5 trillion in money for programs that the American people have largely now said they're no longer interested in supporting, to include health care for non-citizens, illegal immigrants, we're going to keep the government closed. That's not negotiating good faith.
Okay, but it's not for people who are here illegally. It's people who have different legal status, people who are seeking asylum, refugees. Right. We've gone through this with the House Speaker. But I ask on the programs part because
but saying non-citizens is accurate, though. Saying non-citizens is accurate.
You said illegal.
I think it's important.
Now, at this point, one has to wonder, was this supposed to be an interview or a debate? Fact-checking guests is one thing, but actively going back and forth with them while repeatedly asking the same question in a slightly different way is not how you get what the other side is thinking. Kaitlan wasn't really listening. She seemed more interested in jumping in with a response the second he stopped talking rather than actually engaging in good faith. And right on cue, she rephrased the question yet again, this time trying to tie it to the senator's home state. But by then, he'd had enough and gave a direct answer that shut the whole thing down on the spot.
But on the projects, the Department of Energy just canceled $1 billion to the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub. Part of that covers your state of Montana, and your governor actually praised it when it was happening, saying it was going to create good-paying Montana jobs and boost American-made energy. They just yanked $1 billion from that. So is that taking away good-paying jobs in Montana?
Of course it is. As I said, we want the government to be open. You should be saying this to Chuck Schumer, who's closing the government down. I'm agreeing we should have the government open right now. This is an unnecessary shutdown.
But that you're acknowledging that what the Trump administration just pulled in funding is hurting your state.
Having troops not being able to fulfill their functions, having law enforcement officers, having air traffic controllers not be able to direct flights into our airports in Montana hurts our state. Not having federal employees showing up to Farm Service Agency offices during cattle shipping season, that hurts our state. Not having Department of Transportation employees overseeing our highways, our bridges, our airways, our road construction efforts. All those things are hurting every state. So this shutdown is not a good thing, and that's why we don't want it to continue.
That's what it really comes down to. Senator Sheehy didn't take the bait. He kept the focus on where it needed to be, while Kaitlan kept pointing at the symptoms. Tim stayed locked on the root of the problem. The government is shut down. And instead of our leaders coming together to work through it, we're stuck watching them shout on cable news and toss blame like it's a sport. What we should be seeing is them sitting at a table, hashing this out, and actually solving the issue. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on this story. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, keep thinking.